Hello, all. Welcome to the NPTEL course, The Popular Gothic Novel. In today's session, I'll be summarizing some of the texts that we have discussed in the previous weeks. I'll be focusing on week 1, week 4, and week 7. Let's begin the session by looking at the genre of Gothic literature itself. Gothic literature came into being in the middle of 18th century as a result of socio-historical factors. The term Goth was used to refer to the Germanic people initially, and later it was used in relation to medieval art and architecture. It was not until 18th century, during the Romantic period, the term Gothic was applied to literature. The term often has a negative connotation, and it initially signified anything dark, barbaric, medieval, and not modern. The term Gothic first appeared in literature in the work of Horace Walpole's Castle of Otranto. This work has a very important role in the development of Gothic genre, as it was not only the first of its kind, but it also set a vogue for Gothic fiction. One of the key Gothic trope employed by writers in their Gothic fiction is the idea of uncertainty, and it was achieved right from the title page by not giving away the name of the writers. If you could remember the works such as Frankenstein, Vathek, Wuthering Heights, Castle of Otranto, and The Vampire, you could see that the name of the author is missing on the title page, and this was deliberately done by the writers to create a mixture of doubt and uncertainty and estrangement in the mind of the readers. Um, John Polidori's The Vampire is considered to be the first vampire story, and Mary Shelley, through the creation of monster in her work Frankenstein, not only took the Gothic genre to the next level, but she was also able to place a word of caution of scientific inventions and discoveries through her tale. The setting of the novels in Gothic literature is very important, and the main Gothic elements include extreme weather and landscape, rugged mountains, thick forests, omens, and ancestral curses, and magic and supernatural manifestations, a willful villain, horrifying and terrifying events, or a threat of such things happening in the future. Architecture plays a vital role in Gothic literature, and most of the Gothic novels are set in big castles, and the place of the dwelling can be haunted or not. Usually, the castles will have an evil master. One of the important functions of the Gothic is to arouse a pleasing melancholy in the mind of the readers, and Gothic castles serve exactly that purpose. Dungeons, underground passages, crypts, catacombs, hidden spaces, spooky basements, attics, labyrinths, mazes, winding staircases, and dark corridors are other Gothic elements that one can find in the novels. Darkness is always associated with evil and eerie atmosphere, and the Gothic writers do not fail to incorporate such elements in the Gothic novels. Hence, shadows, flickering or burnout candles, a beam of moonlight in the blackness, and electric failure often feature in Gothic novels. We have also discussed in the first week the idea of Gothic Sublime, which was a term introduced by Edmund Burke in his work, Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful. In this work, he distinguishes between beauty and sublime. He proposes that beauty stimulates love, but sublime excites horror. Terror and horror are important facets of Gothic literature. Although we use these two terms interchangeably, it must be understood that there is a key distinction between the two. According to Anne Radcliffe, Gothic terror is beneficial to the soul, whereas Gothic horror is detrimental to the well being of the human soul as horror confines, freezes, and destroys human soul. If Gothic horror is definite and can be achieved through graphic descriptions, Gothic terror is achieved through uncertainty, obscurity, indeterminacy. It is important to understand that Gothic terror leads to Gothic sublime. Gothic horror involves a monster, blood, or corpse in the novels, while terror goes down into an individual's unclear psyche and entails multiple conflicting emotions stirring at once. So, what is the ultimate aim of Gothic novel? It aims to evoke a particularized response from the readers, which is fear. Gothic genre appeals to the primitive instincts of the human beings, and it also highlights the ultimate evil that human beings are capable of. Gothic fiction is also characterized by a sense of foreboding. Even if there is no potential threat, the characters are disturbed by premonitions and dreams, and they always have this feeling that something bad is going to happen. It is interesting to note how Gothic fiction is used in the perpetration of the imperial rhetoric and also the image of the British country as the ideal, which is in constant conflict with the continental other. The foreign is portrayed as something that poses a threat to the British identity. We must also understand that Gothic literature is not something which is limited to Britain. We can see Gothic literature across the globe. When it comes to India, we have works like The Hunger of Stones and The Lost Jewels by Rabindranath Tagore. Vaikom Muhammad Bashir's The Blue Light and A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond are finest examples of Indian Gothic literature. Edgar Allan Poe's Raven and Coleridge's Christabel and The Rime of the Ancient Mariner are best examples of Gothic poetry. Now, let's look at the novel Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey is a mock Gothic novel written by Jane Austen. The novel opens with Catherine Morland receiving an invitation from the Allens to go to Bath with them. Catherine is exposed to the fashionable society of London for the first time there, and she befriends Isabella Thorpe. Catherine Morland is an avid reader of Gothic fiction, and Isabella Thorpe pretends to have read a lot as it is trendy to read Gothic novels. In Bath, Catherine is also introduced to Henry Tilney and she becomes infatuated with him. Catherine and Isabella are later joined by their brothers, James and John Thorpe. James and Isabella have an affair, and John Thorpe also tries to have a relationship with Catherine, but Catherine must have fallen in love with Henry Tilney already, and she does not. She's not very appreciative of John Thorpe's advances. Catherine Walland is later introduced to Henry Tilney's sister, Eleanor Tilney. Their father, General Tilney, mistakes Catherine to be a rich person, and he um, opens and he extends an invitation for Catherine to come along with them to Northanger Abbey. When Catherine reaches Northanger Abbey, she lets her imagination go wild. Her inability to distinguish between reality and fiction make her believe that the Northanger Abbey is just like any other castles that she has read about in the novels, and she also thinks that the house is haunted and suspects General Tilly of murder of his wife. When Henry Tilney understands what is going inside Catherine's head, he confronts her and becomes upset when she tells him about her doubts. After this, Catherine understands her mistakes and asks pardon for her behavior. Meanwhile, General Tilney hears from John Thorpe that Catherine's family is poor. He immediately asks Catherine to leave Northanger Abbey, but in the end, everything works in favor of Catherine and she marries Henry Tilney. Catherine learns her lesson and she also understands the manipulative nature of Isabella Thorpe, who leaves James Merlin for Frederick Tilney but ends up marrying none. When you look at this novel, we understand the ease with which Jane Austen parodies Gothic fiction. And just by looking at the ease, we understand that she has a very good knowledge of the genre and its convention, and she must have also enjoyed reading Gothic literature. When we read Northanger Abbey closely, we understand that the novel is at once a critique as well as a defense of other Gothic novels. Jane Austen mostly deals with the issue of marriage and domesticity in her novels, but in this novel, she takes a turn from her typical style, and this novel should not be read only as a parody, but also as a complex novel, as it highlights the societal horrors that people have to face on a daily basis, and Gothic becomes a tool that Austen employs to expose it. Gothic literature often feature a curious heroine, and Catherine Morland is a finest example of it. She's not really curious, but also innocent, honest, and naive, who is not exposed to the hypocritical ways of the society until she comes to Bath. Her inexperience makes her fall short of judgment and becomes blind to the manipulative and scheming nature of Isabella Thorpe. It is Henry Tilney who points out the shortcomings of Catherine to her. He's an ideal reader who rightly understands the difference between reality and fiction. He's also a good storyteller. He's able to foresee what Catherine is going to encounter in the castle, in the abbey, and he becomes more of a prophet in the story. Henry to me is also the embodiment of the ideal English identity. He takes upon himself to re-educate Catherine Morland, and he wanted Catherine to believe that these night marriage happenings that she reads so much about in the Gothic fiction does not really happen in the domesticity. It does not really happen in domesticity of English houses. This idea can be related to what we have discussed earlier about how England is projected as a safe haven against the demonic other, but all the terrible things happen. Henry Tilney and Eleanor Tilney emerge as the mentor figures of Catherine in the novel, but it is safe to say that they are not adequate mentors, as it is Catherine herself who emerges as her own mentor. Catherine makes a lot of mistakes throughout the novel, but she doesn't fail to understand and rectify it. As a result, she emerges as a mature figure towards the end of the novel, and Gothic becomes the tool for Catherine to maneuver her ways into the world, identified through friendship and loyalty. In this novel, we do not have a traditional Gothic villain who tortures people and keeps them as prisoners in the castle. But Catherine Morland finds a lot of similarity between General Tilney and Count Montoni, and she even misjudges General Tilney and comes to false conclusions. General Tilney is a patriarch of the house and he acts like a despot. His children do not defy his words and obeys him unconditionally. He becomes irritated very easily and makes sure that everybody lives according to his rules that he had laid. Just like Count Montoni, General Tilney is obsessed with money. Although he has not committed a murder, there is a symbolic death in the story. It is right on the part of the readers to assume that Mrs. Tilney must have been heavily unhappy in the world that General Tilney had created for himself and for others. John Thorpe is also, in a sense, a Gothic villain. He is deeply egocentric, conceited, and arrogant and ill mannered. And he had come in the way of happiness of Captain Merlin and Henry Tilney. The character of Isabella Thorpe is very interesting. She can be seen as the anti-heroine. Unlike the heroine, our own heroine, Catherine Morland, she understands the ways of the world and thinks that money is the most important thing in the world than anything. She carefully plans her life and builds relationships accordingly to climb up the social ladder to lead a comfortable life. She does not mind being dishonest and manipulative to achieve her goals. When she learns that James Morland only has a modest income, she switches her affection from James Morland to Frederick Tilney. But in the end, she had to pay a price for her avarice and does not marry either of them. The growth of Catherine's character can also be seen when she finally sees the deceit behind the masked face of Isabella Thorpe and she's able to reject her. Northanger Abbey can also be seen as a female Gothic. And the biggest issue which the novel raises is the societal gender inequalities. A feminist reading of the novel shows a power imbalance prevalent in the society at that time and women becoming victims of the societal double standards. In most of Jane Austen's novels, we can see that she talks about marriage and how important it is for women to marry well to have a safe future. Women depend on men for money, and their sole occupation in life is to find a good suitor. Emma, Persuasion, and Pride and Prejudice talk extensively about this. Women are driven to extreme ends to get married so that solely because they have very limited options to sustain themselves. In this novel, we can see how Catherine and Isabella are the victims of the society. In one sense, we can argue that Isabella's nature as a conniving woman is because of her understanding of the stature of her family in the society, and she takes it upon herself to improve the standards of her family as well as herself. The method she adopts for this, for her betterment, is evil, and that must not be celebrated. We also see that victim can also be the victimizer through Isabella's example. Isabella takes advantage of Catherine's innocence and is not loyal to her. Initially, it was Isabella who was a guiding force to Catherine. Elder Tilney is also a victim. She doesn't have a say in the family and lives under the shadow of the patriarch, her father. Her choice of a life partner also depends upon the likes and dislikes of her father. The character of Henry Tilney's mother must also be looked at as a victim, as she must have had possibly endured a loveless, suffocating life. Women in general are binded by the laws of society in men, and that is very well evident in this novel. This notion becomes an important message as well. And in fact, the greater horror of Catherine is not the fictional horror that she makes up or she thinks about extensively, but the horror that arises out of her understanding that people marry for money and make the life of their spouses miserable. Now, let's shift our focus to A Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol was published in the year 1843 and it was an immediate success. It was translated into many languages and it never went out of print. Although Charles Dickens was born in Portsmouth, he was in every sense a Londoner, and his stories mostly talk about urban London life. Charles Dickens is essentially a social reformer, and through his writing, he brought to the public notice the brutality, injustices, and immorality of the society. He was able to talk directly to the sentiments of the Victorian readers, thereby making a change possible. Charles Dickens was prompted to write the novella A Christmas Carol as he was moved by the appalling revelations made by the parliamentary report on child labor. He wanted this issue to be taken to the public and make them understand the poor working conditions of children as well as the impediments of industrialization. His project was a success as the parliament made significant reform in child labor within 6 months of the publication of Christmas Carol. Christmas Carol is divided into five staves, and the structure of the story mimics a musical composition. We've already seen how architecture plays an important role in a Gothic story, and unlike other novels we have seen earlier, Christmas Carol does not have a big mansion or a castle. It is not present outside the city limits. but Scrooge lives at the very heart of England, and the Gothic is embedded in the urban streets of London. It is important for the Gothic story to maintain a haunting aura, some repression, or a secret from the past, and this is achieved through the house in which the story is set. The house belongs to Jacob Marley, who is Scrooge's former business partner who had been dead for 7 years. And the house, as the story opens, is cold, gloomy, dark, and bleak. After reading this novella, we understand that Dickens does not imitate the traditional Gothic tropes in the novel, but he harnesses signs and turns them into an inventive and effective way of telling a Gothic story. Christmas Carol is a Gothic story in structure, but a moral story in essence. It talks about the transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge from a miserly rich person who fails to see the hardships of the poor into a charitable person. As the story opens, we see a penny pinching Ebenezer Scrooge who's unkind to his clerk Bob Cratchit, his nephew, and to the two gentlemen who had come to his house to seek donation. That very night, Scrooge is visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley. He appears before Scrooge to warn him about the impending doom and ask him to mend his ways. But Scrooge doesn't take the apparition seriously, and as promised, he receives a visitation from the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and the Christmas yet to come. The visions that these three ghosts show Ebenezer Scrooge makes him understand that people live in abject poverty. He feels guilty for his miserliness, and it results in Scrooge's redemption. The trope of Gothic children is important in the narrative. Gothic children are the innocent children who are uncorrupted by the ways of the world, but eventually becomes a victim of the society. Tiny Tim, Little Fan, and the symbolic children want and ignorance redeems Scrooge, and he's brought back to life through their innocence. They do not incite horror in Scrooge, but sympathy. And as a result, it results, and as a result, Scrooge is transformed into a better person. The novel also exemplifies societal horror. The image of the dying woman sitting in the gutter and surrounded by the ghosts of rich businessmen opens up a meaningful discussion on the need for charity and empathy. Ebenezer Scrooge represents the hard heartedness of the industrialist, and the story foregrounds the problems in the society that arose out of industrial revolution. The crippled Tiny Tim is the embodiment of the lived reality of many young children during those times who had to work long hours in factories in an unsafe environment with dangerous machines. The grotesque comedy and macabre imagery dominate Dickens' novella, and in the story, there is a blend of horror and comedy, which makes it so appealing to the readers. So, what parallels can we draw between A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen? Firstly, the two stories exemplify the societal horrors, and it is the societal horrors which is foregrounded in the story rather than the fictional horror. The Gothic trope is used effectively by the two texts in demonstrating the message of forgiveness and redemption. They are essentially moral tales, and at the end, the lead characters are portrayed as changed people. Ebenezer Scrooge is a round character who may or may not have been a good person when he was young. But from the beginning of the tale, he's at the wrong side and is eventually redeemed. Whereas Catherine is an innocent and naive person who learns her lesson and corrects her mistakes at the end. Northanger Abbey and Christmas Carol diverge from the traditional Gothic narrative, and the writers harness the Gothic tropes to bring out the social message rather than faithfully paralleling it in the story. These two stories also talk about the victims of the society. When it comes to Northanger Abbey, Catherine, Isabella, and Eleanor can be seen as victims, and in Christmas Carol, it is the Gothic children. The two stories do not display violence, bloodshed, or any other horrifying aspects of Gothic literature, or it is through suspense, indeterminacy, and obscurity the terror is established in these Gothic stories. The characters such as Ebenezer Scrooge, General Tilney, and Isabella Thorpe exhibits obsession for money, and it is yet another parallel that we can draw from these two stories. That's all for today's session. Thank you all for watching.